And welcome to the 33rd Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival. I'm Ken Jacobson, Executive Director of the Hot Springs Documentary Film Institute, and we are just absolutely thrilled to be partnering with two dear institutional friends, the Garland County Historical Society and Garland County Library, on this event. We were hoping for a slightly better turnout, but this will have to do. But thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many faces here. A couple of quick thank yous and then some introductions. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Oaklawn, our host sponsor, the Arlington Resort Hotel and Spa, the subject of today's great talk. And also really all of our sponsors and our audiences. You've been fantastic since the festival started, and we look forward to a few more great days with you. The first person we have lots of folks in the house today, and I do want to acknowledge Scott Larson, who's the president of hotel operations here at the Arlington. Thank you for being here, Scott, and for all of your great support of the festival. And now I would like to introduce Alan Sims, who's the general manager of the Arlington.
Thank you. Thanks. We are very, very proud sponsors, partners with the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival. And we hope that we will continue this great partnership for many, many more years to come. I think you guys can see from the exterior of the hotel that a lot of good things are happening. We are in a restoration project. Yeah. A lot has been done. A lot of it you probably can't see from the street or maybe even walking through the halls or the lobby, but lots of things are happening. We are on our way. We have over 100 rooms out of order right now in different phases of demolition. We've got final design approval and we are moving forward. It has moved inside the building and we can't wait to show you what we're doing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in this. I have several people here, Nancy and Gay out of my office. We're going to get some history lesson here too. So we're glad that you guys are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and a big thank you to Liz Robbins, the Executive Director of the Garland County Historical Society. Let's hear it for Liz. And also, I do want to thank Paul Kagabine, who's the Adult Services Specialist at the Garland County Library. Thank you, Paul. And of course, a big thank you to Hollis Duncan for being with us today. So Liz, take it away.
I also want to welcome you here today on behalf of the Historical Society and our event co-sponsors, the Documentary Film Festival and the wonderful Ken Jacobson, and the Garland County Library and its director, the also wonderful Adam Webb. And we sincerely thank Paul Kagabine and Greg Wallace from the library for their assistance, and the staff of the Arlington Hotel who have helped in so many ways. And today our program celebrates the 100th anniversary of this iconic building. And our presenter is Hollis Duncan, a 5th generation Arkansan. Now he lives in Tacoma right now, but he's very close to his Arkansas roots. And he started a career as a disc jockey at the age of 14, and he quickly moved into broadcast engineering. He's the former chief engineer of KAAY and the principal engineer at Duncan Engineering in Tacoma. He has degrees in electrical engineering, as you would expect, but he never likes to sit around, so he also has degrees in philosophy and in law. Now, I met Hollis several years ago when he first came to the Historical Society, and I immediately realized he was a man on a mission. He was never satisfied with just some information. If he found out one fact, that fact raised 5 questions in his mind that he also had to find the answers to. And he never gave up. If something was hard to find, he only worked harder as his research took him to libraries and to institutions and to individuals all across the country. And the mission of this tireless detective was, fortunately for us, to know the history of the Arlington hotels and the people who built them. Since 2011, he's been on his quest, and we're delighted that today he's going to share what he's discovered with us. Please welcome Hollis Duncan.
Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us today. When I say us, I'm referring to me and the Garland County Historical Society. This has been a joint effort over these years. Everyone at GCHS has been so helpful to me. And when I walked in 2013, I thought I was walking into a group of strangers. What I quickly realized is that I was surrounded by people who were my friends, and I just hadn't met them yet. It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, GCHS. I would also like to thank the Arlington Hotel. The staff has made me so welcome here over the years that Arlington has been like home. Thank you. This is the Arlington Hotel today. Not quite, actually, because it's this is a little bit before the rehabilitation. This is what it looked like 100 years ago this month. Wow. We can see that the towers are in place, the scaffolding is coming down, and it's being finished out. The roof is almost on, and it's just about to be turned over to the ownership to start planning for a New Year's Eve celebration. Now, when we talk about Fordyce, we got to talk about Fordyce. We're not talking about Fordyce, Arkansas. It's a wonderful little town down in Dallas County. It's named after the fellow we're going to talk about, but it's only because he built a railroad through there. The Cotton Belt Railroad came from Birds Point, Missouri to Texas. It was intended to haul cotton from Texas to a port on the Mississippi River. And Sam built this railroad and a bunch of other railroads. But this was long after his time in Hot Springs. This is Sam Fordyce at 3 times in his life. This is when he was in the Civil War. He was a young banker in Huntsville, Alabama. And he was an older railroad magnate in St. Louis. He's one of the most remarkable people, really, of the 19th century. He did a lot of things. He did a lot of things in his 9 years in Hot Springs. Hot Springs wouldn't be what it is today without Sam Fordyce. But he was always devoted throughout his life to the good of Hot Springs. Now, to see where Sam came from, we need to talk about his background a little bit and what he brought to Hot Springs. He was the son of a Methodist minister who was a center on this Underground Railroad, and also it was a center for Methodist circuit riders. And Sam's job as a young man was to take care of the horses. He never became a preacher, but he was a horseman all of his life. Sam enrolled in Northern Illinois University, where he attended the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858 for the Senate. He became friends with Abraham Lincoln, and he attended the Republican National Convention, not as a delegate, but as a guest. But he was there for Lincoln's nomination as president. Then Sam went to work. His father, in addition to being a Methodist minister, and in addition to being other things, was an investor in a railroad. And the railroad ran west from Wheeling, West Virginia, actually across the river from Wheeling to Chicago. There was not a bridge across the Ohio River in those days, but Sam was the freight agent there, and just about anybody of importance came through his shop. So he got to know a lot of influential people. One of the people that he worked with was the later superintendent of Hot Springs National Park, actually a friend of his father. And he later became the superintendent not of the park, but of the reservation. Sam enlisted in the Civil War as a private. He was promoted to lieutenant and to captain. Although he was known later in life as Colonel Fordyce, he was never actually promoted to be a colonel. He was captured 3 times, he escaped 3 times, and he was wounded 3 times. And he was stationed in the general area of Huntsville, Alabama, where he was the captain of the cavalry pickets. he would ride his horse through the surrounding territory, and he must have been a fabulously easy guy to get along with because he came to know the local citizens and got to know them. He also contracted malaria, and in 1863, he resigned from the army. However, General Crook had one last thing for him to do. He wanted to send him to Nashville to purchase some horses, had what is today $2,500,000 in government vouchers that flew off the train late one night. Sam flew off the train. Trains didn't move very fast in those days. He retrieved the valise, and then he spent the rest of the evening almost catching the train. He had to talk his way through a guarded tunnel that was guarded by the Union troops. And they suggested he just wait for the next train. Well, that wasn't Sam Fordyce. So he caught up with the train the next morning in Garland, Tennessee. And that night, he showed up at the Commercial Hotel in Nashville. Now, the Commercial Hotel was a notorious slave market. It was a very old hotel, and it has been gone so long that people in Nashville don't even remember. We didn't have a picture of it or much of anything else. But he met Samuel Henry Harry Stitt. Now, Harry was born in England. He came to the United States when he was 1 year old with two sisters and his parents. His father was a bookkeeper. And somehow or another, he got into the hotel business and was behind the counter when Sam Fordyce walked in. Now, Sam showed up. This is out of his biography, so his autobiography, so we know quite a bit about it. But he showed up in Nashville late that evening, and he couldn't find a place to stay. So Harry told him there wasn't any vacant rooms, but he could stay in the employees' lounge on the vacant cot. And Sam never forget it. He must have been pretty miserable that evening. He never forget it. And 10 years later, he ran into Harry Stitt in Hot Springs. But after the war, he went to work for himself, actually, began dealing government claims and vouchers. He accumulated quite a sum of money. And in 1866, he married Susan Chadwick. There are several stories about how he met Susan, and the one that I like is that one night he, as a captain of the cavalry pickets, signed a pass to allow Susan to cross the Union lines to visit her brother who was in the hospital. And he forgot all about it. He never met her, but she never forgot it. And when he came back to Huntsville, she reminded him, and I think it was love at first sight. They were married for the rest of their lives. But Sam still was suffering. We don't know the nature of his war wounds, but he did have them. The malaria was debilitating. And at some point, he lost the use of one arm and one leg and was down to 120 pounds. So he went to New York for treatment and was told that he had 6 months to live, and their advice was to go to hot springs and take advantage of the thermal waters. Some of the best advice Sam ever got, and some of the best things that happened to hot springs. Now, Sam walked into, actually he didn't walk in, he was carried on a litter into the Hot Springs Hotel. This is Hill Wheat Lily Plaza today. And this was the Hot Springs Hotel between 1870 and 1878. So in 1874, Sam Fordyce was carried into the Hot Springs Hotel on a litter, and Harry Stitt was behind the counter, and they renewed their friendship. And within a couple of months, Sam was back on his feet. He went back to Huntsville. He came back for another stay in Hot Springs, and then he moved here, and the rest is history. He spent about 9 years here, and we'll get to what remarkable things Sam did for Hot Springs in just a moment. So Harry Stitt had ended up in Hot Springs, and he formed a partnership with Major William Gaines, who was another fellow that for Hot Springs would not be the same without him, because he prosecuted the Hot Springs cases, and even though he lost, he still won in a way. Major William Haney Gaines was born in Kentucky, and he made a bunch of money manufacturing wagons and wagon parts, but he followed the general migration from Kentucky to the South, and he ended up in Chico County, Arkansas, with a plantation that was on an oxbow of the old Mississippi River. He also built a toll road from the Mississippi River up to high ground and over to connect a road that led between Arkansas Post and Columbia. And no one's heard of Columbia, Arkansas, because it washed into the Mississippi River many years ago. But he charged tolls on this road. This was one of the major routes in Texas because it connected with the road to Camden, to Old Washington, and then to travel straight into Texas or the road to Hot Springs. Well, his first wife died, and he married Maria Belding, Hot Springs, and she was an heir to the Belding claim to the springs and to the area that is mainly south of Reserve Street. And Major agreed to pursue the Belding claims to the thermal springs and to pay all of the expenses in exchange for 10% of the claim. He was primarily a landlord. Also, by the time the Hot Springs cases, or by the time the Hot Springs Hotel opened, the Major was losing his sight. He had been fighting vision problems for at least 10 years at that point. And it does sound like cataracts. It was a degenerative condition, but it didn't prevent him from riding his horse around the Hot Springs Reservation. Now, this is another view of the Hot Springs Hotel. You can see what Hot Springs looked like in 1874 or so. And behind the hotel was Hot Springs Creek, which was essentially an open sewer. That was one of the things they had to solve before Hot Springs could become really a livable place. So, Sam met Harry, and Harry met Sam, and they decided to build a hotel. The financing was from Fordyce. He was never a hotel man. He was also always a finance man. Now, Harry was a hotel man. In fact, when he died, he was considered to be one of the leading hotel men in the nation, and not the only Arlington manager to be viewed like that. So the Hot Springs Hotel, Harry Stitt sold his interest in the Hot Springs Hotel. He married the Major's daughter. Sam Fordyce opened the Arlington Hotel. And they formed a partnership with between the two of them, and later with D.C. Rugg, with Colonel DeWitt Clinton Rugg, who apparently had followed Sam to Hot Springs as an investor. Now, Harry was known as Captain Stitt. He never had any military experience. Sam Fordyce was known as Colonel Fordyce, but he never made more than captain. And D.C. Rugg was thrown out of West Point for not showing up for guard duty. We've got the records from the United States Military Academy at West Point. Got them within 24 hours, and then a couple of days later, I got another batch of them with an apology for taking so long. Keep in mind, he was there in 1856. Gives you a little different view of history, at least toward the East Coast. Okay, now here's a question. I worked on this for 13 years, and it never occurred to me to ask this question. So Ellen Clements asked it for me. Why was the hotel named the Arlington? Well, we don't know, but we have an idea. There have been several Arlington hotels over the years, but at the time this Arlington was named, there was only one. It was the Arlington Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was a popular hotel. It was very near the Capitol. Members of Congress lived there. I'm certain the Hot Springs bunch was in and out of it a lot when they were prosecuting the Hot Springs cases, trying to get things straight down here. It was torn down in 1912 to be rebuilt, and it was never rebuilt. And it's now a Department of Labor building. So that's why we think, okay, this is Arlington Park, standing out in the middle of the street. Thank goodness for Google Maps, because I'm not brave enough to do this. And this is the first Arlington Hotel. I guess this could be properly called the Arlington Hotel. It was in across the street in Arlington Park, and existed between 1870 and 1892. The Rector House was there before, owned by Governor Rector, and the first Rector Bath House, and they were incorporated into the Arlington Hotel, and it was expanded quite a bit. Then the Diamond Joe Railroad entered Hot Springs on March 1st, 1876, and finally people could get to Hot Springs without a miserable ride on the stagecoach. Now, the interesting thing about Diamond Joe Railroad is it was entirely private. It was not built with land grant money like virtually every other railroad that was built. And it was owned by Diamond Joe himself, and when he died, it was owned by Mrs. Reynolds. And people had to go to Chicago to negotiate leases with her. And I'm not sure at what point it was sold, whether it was sold or not. I've not followed that part of it, but it was real difficult to build the Arlington Hotel. Before the railroad, they had to bring everything in on a wagon. They had to build a sawmill. They had to make their own brick. And Colonel Rugg said it was built under singular and hazardous circumstances. Finally, D.C. Rugg had enough. He wasn't a hotel man either. He was very important to the school history of Hot Springs, but not so much to the hotel business. And he sold his interest to Albert Belding Games, who was the second son of Major Games. And then he sold his interest in the S.H. Stewart Company, which was the operating system for the hotel. This is Albert Belding Games. People have forgotten him for several reasons, the most of which is that he moved to New Jersey in 1896 after his parents' estate was settled. And he lived there ever after, although he ran things in Hot Springs. He had an office in New York, and he's listed in the New York City Directory as a capitalist. And he was in partnership with his two sons. And when Harry Stitt married his sister Augusta, they became brothers-in-law. And he wasn't the only brother-in-law. When Albert married Dolly Fellows of Camden, and she was one of four daughters of grocer Daniel W. Fellows, whose life almost encapsulates the steamboat era on the Washita River. He died a year before the railroad came in, and been living there since 1849. And what an interesting life. But the other sister, another sister, Lillian, had married a banker in New York named Charles B. Platt. That's not the original color of his tie. I had to give the guy a color somehow or another. But Charles Platt made a great deal of money, first off in the leather tanning business in New York, where he ran a tanning company. Apparently that was a big thing in the Dutch era. In Englewood, New Jersey, when they finally put a railroad in there, you get across the New Jersey swamps to it. He made a second fortune by founding a bank. And he and Charles became brothers-in-law when Albert married Dolly. And Charles began, whether he wanted to or not, I suppose, to invest in the Arlington and Eastman hotels. He also invested in his father-in-law's business in Camden and became a major financer. All right, this is the Arlington lawn today. And this is the red brick Arlington. The first Arlington Hotel was falling apart after many years of use, and it was torn down, and this magnificent hotel took its place. It opened on March 25th, 1893. It was the first project of the architect Louis Christian Mulgard, who won a design competition. He was the junior partner in a firm in St. Louis, and whether or not Sam Fordyce sent him that way or not, we don't know. But it was a wonderful hotel. It was 5 stories high, 300 guest rooms. Many of them had a private bath. And most every floor had an exit to the national park. So it was very easy to take advantage of the park. And it was the center of social activity in Hot Springs. They had concerts every day, 3, and lots of dancing and lots of parties and all sorts of things. And it was the top hotel in Hot Springs. Now, when Harry Stitt retired, he retired as manager when the Red Brick Arlington opened, and he was succeeded by Lyman T. And this is Lyman Hay. They said if you didn't get along with Lyman Hay, there was something wrong. He was, when he passed away, or even in his later days, one of the leading hotel men in the country. He was born in Illinois, moved to Hot Springs after he graduated from Northern Illinois University, when his father was a physician, and he operated the Hay House up on Park Avenue. It was right behind where the Majestic is now, and there's still a shell of it some years ago. And Lyman married the third sister, Lota Fellows. Her full name was Lota Wana, but she went by Lota, and she was from Camden, and she became the hostess of Hot Springs. And he gained, when he married Lota, he gained Harry Stitt, Albert Gaines, and Charles Platts as his brothers-in-law. And at that point, the Arlington family was pretty much complete. Now, Sam Fordyce was not married into the Arlington family, but there was never a time in the history of the Arlington Hotel, up until it was sold to Southwest Hotels in the 40s, I believe, early 50s, that there was not a Fordyce and not a Gaines involved in the Arlington Hotel. Now, when Sam was in Hot Springs, this is some of the things that he did. He he created the water, gas, and electric light companies, the Electric Street Railway, the Mountain Valley Water Company, the Opera House, which is still lamented, and the Palace, and later the Fordyce Bathhouse. In fact, he had to stop work on the Fordyce Bathhouse several times because it was costing him so much money. He persuaded Senator Logan to establish the Army-Navy Hospital here in Hot Springs. And when he was in the Civil War, General Sam was in Pittsburgh, and he noticed a horse getting away from an officer, and he calmed the horse down and got the officer back on it, and the officer was General Grant. And some years later, he went to Washington, D.C., and they were walking down the street, and he saw General, then President Grant, and greeted him. He said, "Oh, I know you. You're the young man who saved my horse." That came in very handy on the morning before General Grant, President Grant, left office, because Sam was in his office and talked him into establishing the Hot Springs Commission. And then he laid out the streets and the trails of the Hot Springs Reservation. Then Sam went to St. Louis to build railroad. He built at least 24,000 miles of railroad in the 1890s. In addition to the Cotton Belt Railroad, he built railroads in Texas, down on the Rio Grande Valley near McAllen, it's a town of Sam Fordyce, Texas. You can't really find it anymore because it's been long since bypassed. And then the Hot Springs Railroad had a monopoly coming into Hot Springs, and he decided to break that monopoly by building a railroad down from just south of Little Rock, crossing the Saline River, coming down through Lonsdale, and it was the Little Rock Hot Springs and Western Railway, known as the Hot Western. And Sam kept up with things, and he realized that what later became the Missouri Pacific Railroad had not renewed the lease with Mrs. Reynolds. So he went to Mrs. Reynolds and gained control of the Hot Springs Railroad. And one morning they woke up. Sam owned both railroads, or controlled both railroads in the Hot Springs. Now, he could have taken advantage of that, but that's not what Sam was about. He cut a deal to reduce the rates to Hot Springs, and then you can barely find the trace of the Hot Western today. It is there, but he forced the Missouri Pacific to, I think it was the Iron Mountain at that point, to reduce their rates and make things a little more accessible in Hot Springs. Now, between 1894 and 1919, the founders left one way or the other. Major Gaines died, and when he died, there was a tremendous lawsuit, Gaines versus Gaines, to take care or to deal with the rents that the major had collected over the years. And how exactly that was settled, I don't know. The records were lost in a fire. Nonetheless, after it was settled, Albert Gaines moved to Englewood, New Jersey. His wife, Dolly, had lived there for quite a while. I don't think she had a great deal of affection for Hot Springs, possibly for Arkansas at all. So she was content to live in Englewood near her sister Lily. Captain Harry Stitt died in November 1913, and Sam Fordyce returned to Hot Springs in 1904, and he died during a trip for his health in Atlantic City, New Jersey, in August of 1919. When Albert passed away, when Sam Fordyce passed away, his son John Lyson Fordyce joined the board of the Arlington Hotel. Now, in 1904, the city of St. Louis wished to celebrate the Louisiana Pacific Exposition. They were irritated that they lost the 1983 World's Fair to St. Louis and immediately began planning. And they got quite a bit of federal money for this, but none of this money could be used to house guests. They knew people were going to invade, are going to visit the fair, and a bunch of them did. So they built this hotel and needed two expert hotel men to run it. They were Albert Gaines and Lyman Hay. So Lyman moved to St. Louis and lived there for the rest of his life, running the Jefferson Hotel. It still exists. It's being remodeled even as we speak. I was there about a year ago, and they're doing a fine job of it. But they still oversaw things in Hot Springs. They had managers here, but they were still the guys in charge. In October 21st, 1921, Albert Gaines passed away. Quite a shock to his family, because they expected him to live as long as the major did, perhaps well into his 90s. But it wasn't to be. And 6 months Before Albert passed away, he may have had a premonition because he had his will revised. Albert was succeeded by his eldest son, Daniel Fellows Gaines, and Daniel was president of the Arlington hotels until they were sold to Southwest Hotel. They died in 1966, but they executed plans to purchase the Hotel Jefferson, and they remodeled the red brick Arlington across the street. It opened in October 21st, 1922. Now, Daniel would rather be out playing golf than anything. He was a champion golfer. He was at every tournament. He's also been on the board of the hotels, but this was thrust into his lap, the hotel operations, very suddenly, very unexpectedly, and he rose to the task. Now, one of the things that was executed or started before Albert passed away were plans to build an annex to the Arlington Hotel. This, of course, is the red brick Arlington across the street, and this is a modified version of the Arlington Hotel that we know today. It doesn't have towers, but it was intended to be a standalone hotel because they knew within reason. They've had political strings pulled before, and they had bills passed in Congress to keep the Arlington Hotel in Arlington Park, but their lease had 7 or 8 years to run, I believe, and they had a pretty good idea that the National Park was not going to renew it. In fact, they would not let them build this arch across Fountain Street. So they proceeded to to clear the property for the annex, but they really hadn't started. But the situation got forced upon them when the red brick Arlington burned on April the 5th, 1923. This was a real tragedy. It was in the middle of the day, or really late in the middle of the afternoon. Most of the hotel guests were out. Many were evacuated. Some were rescued from the rooms by firemen. And by that evening, the Arlington Hotel was a total loss. Now, we mentioned John Risen Fordyce just a moment ago. He was the son of Colonel Sam Fordyce, and he was also an Army engineer. He designed what was Camp Pike and is now Camp Joseph T. Robinson, north of Little Rock, and designed facilities in St. Louis during World War I. And he had a professional gas mask. So he went home, grabbed the gas mask, and went from room to room to make sure everything was safe. Jack Dempsey was there. He found 2 women collapsed in a hallway, threw them over his shoulders, and carried them to safety. Detective William Pinkerton was sitting on the front porch, smoking a cigar, and said, "Oh, everything will be just fine." And he lost everything. There is the poor red brick Arlington in the early stages of its fire. The kitchen area would have been over here to the left. So you can see how it spread. Of course, it was primarily, it had red brick on the outside, but it was primarily a wooden structure. And by the next morning, that's what it looked like. One fireman, unfortunately, was killed, and 2 were hurt very badly in the fire. George R. Ford of Hot Springs left a family, and he's buried out south of town. I've not been out to visit his resting place yet, but I shall. But it was a total, complete loss. Now, the next thing that happened, the very next month, was a flood. If you've noticed, Hot Springs Creek drains an area up around Park Avenue in Whittington, and it's really a large basin that comes out of a very small creek. So we had a deluge like we tend to have here in Arkansas one afternoon, and it was concentrated on the drainage area of Hot Springs Creek. And it was quite a disaster. 100 automobiles became floating weapons. It lifted sheets of asphalt from the pavement. The floodwaters down at the Games building, which is down here on Wheatley Plaza, were as high as 11 feet. And there's a great story in one of the memoirs about a fellow who got trapped in that flood and was rescued, a young fellow. Then lightning came along, like it tends to do with our storms, and set the Hotel Marquette and several other buildings on fire. The damages in today's terms were $36,700,000. Most of it uninsured. That's not a great picture, but you can see the pieces of pavement that are picked up and thrown about. And there are some automobiles that were tossed about in the flood. It's quite a mess. But Hot Springs rebuilt. Within weeks, they were reopened. It was a group effort. About the only thing it did positive for the Arlington was pretty much cleared the debris out of Arlington Park so they could start again. But I don't think it was an intended consequence. And then many merchants were still back in business, and the Red Brick Arlington thought they would be too, but it wasn't quite that easy. They wanted to rebuild a hotel on Arlington 1, and the National Parks Director, Stephen Mather, came to town and said that they'd have the full cooperation of the National Park Service to rebuild the hotel. There were two problems with this, three actually. Stephen Mather was not the guy in charge. That would have been the Department of the Interior Secretary. And he was caught up in the Teapot Dome scandal and ended up serving jail time. So there really wasn't anybody in charge of the National Park, the Department of Interior, to make these decisions. Also, Stephen Mather was an early example of what we now call today bipolar disorder. He fought for 5 or 6 years to establish the National Park Service, and when he was appointed the first director in 1917, he should have been ecstatic. Instead, he went into a 6-month depression and had to be hospitalized. And he had a fellow named Horace Albright, who was a lawyer from San Francisco, who ran the Park Service in his stead, but really didn't have any decision-making authority. Well, the Arlington Hotel had purchased the land here at Central and Fountain in 1960. These are people with a great deal of foresight. And they decided to build their annex into a regular hotel. But they didn't have the money to do it. The Red Brick Arlington was insured for $700,000, and they needed a lot more of it than that to build this hotel. And famous Hot Springs attorney Will Martin, still considered to be one of the finest attorneys that Arkansas ever produced, came up with the idea of offering preferred stock to the citizens of Hot Springs. And in fact, they did. It sold 3.5 days to 187 stockholders. And the financing of the Arlington was insured. In fact, they had a little more money than they intended to have. One of the features of this, there had been a lot of stock scandals in the early part of the century. And the Arlington Hotel agreed that they would not repurchase any of the stock at any time. And in fact, the stockholders from the Arlington, and the Arlington stock was widely held in Hot Springs. And when Southwest Hotels started to acquire stock, they acquired quite a bit of it from private owners. And they had the best architects. George R. Mann was the dean of Arkansas architects. He designed the Arkansas State Capitol, which was originally a competition that he had submitted for the Montana State Capitol. And he supervised the construction through most of it. Eugene Stern was a young man from Hungary. He moved here when he was 1 year old and studied in prominent architectural schools. I should say that George R. Mann was in one of the first classes of one of the first architecture schools in the country at MIT. Mann and Stern was formed in Little Rock. Eugene Stern built amusement parks before he came to Hot Springs, and he actually not held the patent, but he represented the patent owners for a number of rides that were popular in the early days. So they formed Mann and Stern. They had offices down here at the Sumter Little building in Hot Springs and also in Little Rock. The building that they built in Little Rock is the Atkins building, but it was built to house Mann and Stern. But they designed the Fordyce and Wawa Bathhouse, the Government Free Bathhouse, Thompson building, and hotels around Arkansas. The Pines Hotel in Pine Bluff was their design. I think it's still standing. The Reichsland Hotel in Stuttgart was one of theirs. And also the Hotel Washington Uree in Shreveport, which is not still standing. These were the builders. In many ways, these guys were the heroes of the New Arlington Hotel. George Ault, Frank Ault, and George Burton. And George Burton's sons, nephews, still run the Alton Burton Construction Company, which is now Maxson Construction Company in Little Rock. So they put out the bids for the new hotel, and they wanted it done. They figured that Hot Springs could survive one season without the Arlington, but they'd have difficulty surviving two. So they wanted it open by New Year's Day, 1925. And 6 of the contractors said, no, it can't be done. Bolton Burton did. They submitted a bid of $2,100, $2,100,000. That's $38.5 million today. And they signed the contract and went to work. Now that's the first steam shovel of 2 that came in. You can see the debris over in Arlington Park across the street. There's Fountain Street. And they started digging the foundation for the new Arlington Hotel. Okay, how much is this? We have the figures that are involved in this hotel. The first thing they did is they excavate 50,000 cubic yards of soil. And okay, we're going to envision that. Let's say we pave Central Avenue to the depth of 1 yard. We cover Central Avenue from the Arlington throughout its width all the way to Belding Street, almost a mile and a half. There's my artistic indication of how it might have been, but that gives you an idea. Then they had to pour the foundation, 12,000 cubic yards of concrete. All right. If we did that, if we paved Central Avenue to a depth of 1 foot, it would be from the Arlington to just beyond Grand Avenue, almost a mile. And the first concrete footings for the hotel were poured on November the 23rd, 1923, and New Arlington was open for business 1 year later, or was turned over to the ownership 1 year later. So there's my my representation of the concrete. There's the intersection of Exxon and Valero, Central Avenue and Grand. Now, one of the wonderful things about the Arlington Hotel is we have these incredible photographs. They appear to have been made from the top of the Superior Bathhouse by a company called Too Cute Studios. And they were real popular up here on Fountain Street, taking pictures in Happy Hollow, and there's lots of Too Cute Studio photos. But they made these magnificent photographs that are 20 inches by 12 inches and are very, very detailed. I'd love to know the camera they used. And we found these laying on a table at Matson Construction Company in Little Rock. Charles and Russ Matson had given them, loaned them to the Arkansas State Archives, who copied them on one of their $100,000 German scanners. And we have high resolution copies of these photographs that are so detailed that we can see people waving to the cameras because they knew the picture was to be taken. Here's the first photograph of the Arlington Hotel of that sequence. You can see the front steps are being formed here. Hats for Less Money is still in business. But business got underway. And when they started work on the hotel, they were working 24 hours a day in 3 shifts. Mr. Matson told us that, according to family legend, there were men lined up over on the street waiting for someone to quit or for them to be another worker. This was a real popular job, even in the relatively prosperous early 1920s. Now, one of the things that happened to the Arlington Hotel, one of the things that makes it special is it had a radio station on the roof. KTHS was not the first radio station in Arkansas. That would have been WOK in Pine Bluff, owned by what was then Arkansas Light Power Company, later AP&L. But it was not a significant radio station. KTHS was built for the purpose of advertising hot springs to the United States. And in fact, when it came on the air, everyone within about 2,000 miles knew there was a party going on in Hot Springs that night. But it was a group effort between the Hot Springs Junior Chamber of Commerce. Now, this is not the current Junior Chamber of Commerce. They have their own illustrious history. This was a previous chamber that was formed for the sole purpose of bringing a broadcast station to Hot Springs. Now, the original idea was that it would be run by the city of Hot Springs. Nobody had any idea how much money that would have involved, and that was kind of a non-starter. But the Rotary Club financed a successful remote broadcast from what was then the largest radio station in the Southwest, WBAP, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram's radio station in Fort Worth. They had a very expensive remote broadcast from Hot Springs High School for about 2 hours, and they got everyone's attention, including the attention of the Arlington Hotel. Now, let's look some more construction. This is April 11th, 1924. We can see the 3 wings are going up. See the Alton Burden sign here. Now, the Arlington used 2,170,000 bricks. And it appears that those bricks were made right down here in just outside of Camden. Not Camden, just outside of Melbourne, because the Acme Brick Company moved into Melbourne in 1913, and it's likely that that was the best source of bricks. There weren't that many brick manufacturers in Arkansas at that time, but if we decided to pave Central Avenue with our bricks, we would end up at Hobson Avenue, distance of just over 1.3 miles. J&B Party Center, I understand, is the friendliest place in town. So I've heard. Okay, construction's going on. Here we are into May 1924, and it's starting to look like a hotel. The scaffolding is up, and one of the things we might want to keep in mind is the scaffolding was not steel scaffolding. It was all made from wood, and the wood was, as best we can tell, just mined out of the hills around the Garland County. Okay, the hotel, as you can see, is full of plaster. 1,175,000 square feet of it. Okay, if we're going to pave Central Avenue, again, we cover Central Avenue almost to the US 275 pass, just over 3.5 miles. And construction continues June 24th, 1924. You can see the start of the towers are being built. Windows are not in yet, but things are coming right along. All right, well, 2 million board feet of lumber. Suppose we built a 5-foot tall fence and laid it out like that. We'd be to the Oak Street US 64 exit in Conway if we took the bypass. We're sticking to modern roads because the roads in those days, it wasn't until late 1924 that there was a reliable road between Little Rock and Hot Springs. There was a washout in 1921 on 10 Mile Creek at Lonsdale that pretty much put the end to travel there unless the creek was down. July 11th, 1924. Coming along. Windows are still not in, but quite a bit of work is being done. Then we have the piping. 343,200 feet of various types of pipe. And if we went to Arkadelphia this time, we would end up just a little bit short of the second Prescott exit on Interstate 40, almost 65 miles. August 11th, 1924. The towers are starting to take shape, and she's starting to look like the Arlington. Then we have the electrical wiring. 1,056,000 feet of various types of electrical wiring. Okay, if we laid that end to end, we'd go down Central Avenue through Little Rock. We'd be 6 miles beyond Pocahontas, Arkansas, Randolph County. And I tried to choose all of these so we stayed inside the state of Arkansas. Another route would have taken us just beyond Memphis, Tennessee. All right, September 5th, 1924. The scaffolding is around the towers, and they're working along, and then the windows have been installed. That's something that's happened. So the Arlington is becoming to look more like the Arlington every day. Then we have the doors and windows. 3,112 doors and windows. And assuming 6 inches per door and window, we have 7 stacks that are as tall as the Hot Springs Mountain Tower. October 1st, 1924, beginning to look like the Arlington. We notice the Alton Burden sign has been moved up to the 10th floor, and the scaffolding has been taken down on the fountain wing and is coming down on the central wing. That's a terminology I picked up from the Arlington, my friends at the Arlington Hotel Engineering Department, as they refer to it as the main wing, central wing, and the fountain wing. I've tried to do that. Seems to work. November 7th, 1924, construction continues. Now, KTHS, once the Arlington decided to build KTHS, they went after the best people they could find. And these 2 people were the people that did the WBAP remote broadcast. Cam Arnew was a newsman, and when Amon Carter, owner of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, decided to go into broadcasting, he asked everybody in the newsroom if they'd do it, and they all said no, so he turned to the junior man and said, "You're it." Well, Camorr New ended up writing a very influential article in 1923 in Editor and Publisher magazine about the costs of running a broadcast station and what it would be like and what one should expect. And instead of training someone else, they hired Cam away from WBAT. And with him came Edwin Olds. Ed Olds was trained by Bill Branch, who was a legendary Texas engineer. He ended up down on the border building what were called the big border blasters. He didn't work for Dr. Brinkley, but he worked for the rest. And I actually worked for his daughter and son-in-law in El Paso. And I'd like to say they were wonderful people to work for, but I really can't. And the Arlington Hotel purchased the equipment from Western Electric. This was the best equipment that was available. It also got its purchasers access to Bell System telephone lines, program lines. And KTHS made huge use of this. They had broadcast venues all over Hot Springs, the Rosa Tacoma Hotel, Princess Theater, the what was then the DeSoto Springs building, Mountain Valley Water Building, I believe. They broadcast Sunday services from first what was then Central Methodist Church, later First Methodist Church, and from the First Presbyterian Church, and broadcast from the Majestic Hotel, their orchestra, and also from the Eastman Hotel. So this was a major broadcasting station. It was also unusual. KTHS was unusual in the sense that most broadcasting stations in 1923 and 1924 really didn't know why they were there. Some of them were owned by newspapers. Some of them were owned by colleges. A couple of them were owned by churches, but no one really had a rationale for having a radio station, but KTHS did to promote Hot Springs to the world. So on November the 6th, 1924, the two steel towers for KTHS arrived in Hot Springs. They were built by the Thomas Pigeon Steel Company, who also built what is now the Interstate 70 bridge across the Mississippi River at Memphis. They were mainly bridge builders, but they could handle the tower problem. And this is the only close shot we have, again, courtesy of Matson Construction Company, of the towers going up. You can see that OSHA was a little less influential in those days. But the KTHS, these towers were not the antenna. The antenna was strung like a hammock between the two of them, and it was fed from a transmitter building that was adjacent. You can't see it coming up there. It's adjacent to what is now the elevator room up on the 12th floor of the office. It's long gone. Okay, KTHS tested for several nights, and then they went on the air on Friday, December the 19th, 1924. And during its first 2 months, KTHS received 25,000 letters asking for information about vacationing in Hot Springs. And each of these letters, each one was answered by Miss Alta Smith, who was the publicity director of the Hot Springs Chamber of Commerce, and another person who Hot Springs would not be what it is today without Alta Smith. We have recently run into someone who knew Miss Alta Smith, and we're really looking forward to seeing what she has to say, because she was publicity director from 1923 until I think 1966 when she passed on. All right, we're finished. KTHS is up on the roof. The Arlington Hotel is finished and just about ready to open. It was turned over to the ownership after 14 months of round-the-clock construction. And Alton Burton got finished a little bit early and earned the equivalent of, there was $1,000 a day, either penalty or bonus, depending on which direction. And they just missed 45 days of bonus because there were some critical parts that were not delivered. And I don't know what those parts are, and neither do the Matson brothers, but we'd sure like to know. Maybe we'll have the chance to ask that question someday. But immediately when the hotel was turned over, the Arlington began to prepare a banquet for the stockholders of the new Arlington Hotel. This was also the formal opening of KTHS. So on Friday, December the 19th, they held a grand tour of the building at KTHS, and they hosted a dinner for the 187 stockholders. And a list of these stockholders appeared in an article the next day in the Sentinel Record, and it's amazing how many of them had the title Mrs. in front of their name. I've not looked up to see who these people are, but that's another area of research. But they were all Hot Springs people. And entertainment was provided by the New Arlington Hotel Orchestra. The grand opening, New Year's Eve, 1924, was the biggest celebration that Hot Springs had ever had. Missouri Pacific Railroad reserved the entire 5th floor. The National Park Director, Stephen Mather, came to town. Mayor Harry A. Jones, and Arkansas Governor-elect Tom Terrell attended the grand opening. He was a one-term governor because he was an active member of the Ku Klux Klan. And I don't think that he wore very well, so he doesn't have footprints in Arkansas history except that he showed up for this. Then the lobby was cleared and dancing began. The New Arlington Hotel Orchestra performed in the dancing parlor on the mezzanine with music broadcast on KTHX. The New Arlington Hotel Orchestra was a division of the Meyer Davis Orchestra. Meyer Davis started in having orchestras in the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., and in the Astoria Hotel in New York City. And then he got the idea of franchising orchestras. For many years, orchestras on cruise ships, orchestras in hotels, and orchestras for special occasions were contracted through the Meyer Davis Orchestra. Let's listen.
I got an eye full of you, dear heart. No one told me why skies are blue, but I got an eye full of you, please heart. You came along, chasing all my despair, and nothing wrong you made like her. I knew, you knew what love can do, but I got an eye full of you,
Thank you for joining me today. What are your questions? What happened after that? In 1928, the Arlington Hotel realized that they were spending an awful lot of money on this radio station, and they had an agreement with the Hot Springs Chamber of Commerce to take it over. So it moved to the Hot Springs Country Club. It increased power, became owned by the Chamber of Commerce with studios or offices, at least down here on Central Avenue. It gained higher power, went to 10,000 watts, became the NBC affiliate for Arkansas, and spawned Lum and Abner and a bunch of other things. The Colonel Barton of Lion Oil Company and the Barton Coliseum fame wanted to buy KTHS, and for some reason the Chamber of Commerce wouldn't sell it to him. So the Colonel went and bought KAR, what later became KARK radio in Little Rock, and took the NBC affiliation away from KTHS, who became a CBS affiliate. In the late 50s and in the early 50s, it just became too expensive to run a 10,000 watt radio station in a town of 10,000 people. The revenue just wasn't here, and unfortunately, Hot Springs sits in some very low conductivity, so KTHS did not cover Arkansas very well during the day. So they moved to Little Rock, south of Little Rock to Wrightsville, increased power to 50,000 watts, and in 1961, they became KAAY, and was Arkansas's friendly giant rock station for a while. I was their chief engineer in the early 1980s. I'd like to say it was a wonderful place to work, but by then it had been bought by people from away from Arkansas. And one manager said that they needed to build a fence around Arkansas to keep all the loony people. We can imagine how popular that made him. But it deteriorated. It finally went religious. And not too long ago, maybe 3 years ago, they allowed one of their 3 towers to fall. And instead of running 50,000 watts at night, they're running 80 watts at night and barely cover Little Rock. Very sad. Now, what became of the Arlington Hotel? It is being reborn. I tell people that when I first started coming here in 2013, I felt like I was visiting an elderly relative that was maybe not doing all that well and maybe wasn't going to make it to 100 years. And thanks to Sky Capital, she's a young girl.
When did the pool go in?
I don't know that answer. Does anyone know when the pool went in? Some years later, I really don't. Well, the Arlington in those days looked, that slide. Yeah, see, the Arlington in those days looked somewhat different. The buildings, the meeting rooms on the end of the fountain wing were not there. And in fact, that was open to the air because people would come around and turn their horse carriages around there to let people off of the valet. You see, it doesn't extend out over the convention center. That the fountain wing extension was added later. In fact, that little circular building was at one point called the Arlington Garage, and it was an actual garage, not a parking garage, but an actual garage, and it predates the Arlington. I was talking to one of the folks out there that was replaying the brick, and we were wondering if that was the original cement there, the original mortar, and his opinion was that it was. So it looked somewhat different in those days, and in a lot of ways it looks exactly the same. Better than it ever did, in fact.
One of your slides said something about the practice of drumming.
Drumming, yes. Okay, drumming was the practice of some bathhouse owners, some pharmacists, some doctors to insert people on the trains, either in St. Louis or Little Rock, to go around and buddy up to the passengers and recommend this. Oh, wait, I've got the best doctor in Hot Springs. You need to go to him. This was something that the Hot Springs reservation superintendents really disliked. And the bathhouse pool was formed in some regards to combat that, and maybe in some regards to make sure everybody had plenty of business. That's another thing the Hot Springs reservation would have stopped it.
Thank you for the information about my ancestors.
I'm sorry, who are your ancestors?
Buildings.
Oh, now the buildings, you could do an entire program on the buildings. Ludo building, and I have trouble pronouncing his name. Ludo. That's not how it looked to me in the first, and I've had trouble getting that out of my Look, he was a very interesting fellow. sailed out in the War of 1812, and on his first soiree, he was captured by the British and imprisoned at Halifax, Nova Scotia, which apparently affected his health for the rest of his life. But another story about him that I find rather interesting is when he lived on Hot Springs Creek, it was fine because the malaria mosquito would not live in Hot Springs Creek. Then he moved to Gulf Creek, where the malaria mosquito was there. And the Belling family lost 3 members of their family in one epidemic. Leaving Lydia basically raised the family by herself.
So there were other large hotels in Hot Springs at that time.
Oh, heavens, yes. And I would.
So can you give a comparison of the Arlington Hotel with the other hotel?
I absolutely cannot. I could come a little close to the Eastman Hotel, but I'm not paying any attention. I believe Ron Ford is here, and he can answer every question that you have about.
Small hotel, smaller. How feasible is it that we can rebuild the gym? Maybe with housing or better.
I'm not even sure who owns that property right now.
Hot Springs.
Oh, City of Hot Springs. Okay, well, there we go. I guess you'd have to talk to the City of Hot Springs about that. I don't know what their plans were. I was able to see the Majestic by peering through the windows about 6 months before it burned, and it would have taken a tremendous amount of work to bring that up to any sort of standard. I'm not convinced it was all that well built to begin with, not like the Arlington. This hotel was built to last. This was the first fully fireproof hotel in Hot Springs, and I think you'd have problems starting a fire in it today. They spent a lot of money. They did it right. They got the best people, the best architects, and they had the money to do it thanks to the citizens of Hot Springs.
Could you remind everyone that the Historical Society is a nonprofit organization, and we'd be tickled to death if people who appreciated this program would join and get membership brochures on the table.
Ladies and gentlemen, Julie Brenner next. We'd love to have you as members of the Garland County Historical Society. It's a tremendous bunch. They're wonderful. It's fun to go down there and just hang out. And it's one of the most incredible archives I've been to. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd like to add another little historical side note that you mentioned I'll just stand up here. I work out at Garland Woodland Garden, and so I know a lot of history of the garden. Malvern Brickyard was owned by Mrs. Garvin's father. She bought the property, or he bought the property that is now Garvin Gardens for the clay mineral on it to make bricks in Malvern. So the bricks that were used to build the Arlington has a connection to Miss Garvin's family.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I get these charts?
Can you get the chart? You mean the PowerPoint presentation? Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah, get with me afterwards.
Did you find any documentation in the early days of KTHS about the Crystal Ballroom broadcasts?
I'm trying to think where the Crystal Ballroom was.
Is it not the second floor ballroom?
Well, in those days, that was called the dancing parlor.
Right.
It's now called the ballroom, but it was referred to in the newspapers at the time as the dancing parlor. I don't know when it became the Crystal Ballroom, but nothing really specific. A lot of those documents are gone, and people, KTHS was entirely live. There was no recording of anything. In fact, they were not permitted to broadcast recordings by their license. So everything was live, and of course, everything was bouncing around the diameter of the universe at this point. Thank you all so much for joining me today. We are open for the next 100 years.
Yeah.